yesterday, there were hearings with the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and also the House Appropriations Committee. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Health and Human Services was the subject. These were hearings about the HHS budget and the layoffs of employees that have affected Health and Human Services' ability to look after the health of the American public. They had some disastrous decisions, laying off folks that were supposed to be inspecting or tracking bird flu and then having to hire them back because of the crisis.
That's surveillance. We don't want surveillance on flus.
They're also cutting in the House bill food safety inspections. I thought this was about making America healthy again.
That means a different oil at the burger for the burgers in the fast food place.
Yeah, and we'll play this clip of Bernie Sanders questioning RFK Jr., which I think really shows the contrast in a left-wing versus a libertarian perspective on health, which is basically what RFK Jr. embodies at this point.
Yeah,
and much
a
like
rich person that doesn't want to pay for your cancer treatments perspective.
And much like libertarians on war, for example, or on the military-industrial complex, sometimes we can find a little bit of alignment, but overall, the visions are entirely different. One is a humanist vision, and one is at least in the context of foreign policy, isolationist, sometimes eugenicist. Yeah, we may agree that we don't want to be in Afghanistan or something like that, or we shouldn't send bombs to Israel. But if there's going to be a fork in the road after we come to that initial agreement. And I view this Bobby Kennedy stuff in a very similar vein. Here is Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They sold, and I think they're a little upset right now with the business practices of the company they sold it to, but that's an aside for right now.
Unilever, the same place that bought Joe Rogan's company.
Interesting. Here he is actually participating in protests against RFK Jr. and these cuts and tying it in with Gaza. And then you'll see him being interviewed by somebody as he leaves or is kicked out of the hearing.
Permitted while the committee conducts its business. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individuals from the hearing room.
Move down the hallway.
Ben, why are you getting arrested?
Move down the hallway. If you stop, you will be arrested.
Poor kids in Gaza by buying bombs and pays for it by kicking kids off Medicaid in the U.S.
Keep going down. Keep going down the hallway.
Ben, how many days have they been starving in Gaza?
What has it been? 75 days by now.
Stop.
Anthony, I need my shoe.
It's our program. Now let's go right now. Let's go. Everybody. Okay. Everybody. Stop business. Pick it up.
Ben, what are you calling for the Congress and senators to do for Gaza?
Congress and the senators need to ease the siege. They need to let food into Gaza. They need to let food into starving kids.
What did you say in there, man?
I said that Congress is paying to bomb poor kids in Gaza and paying for it by kicking poor kids off Medicaid in the U.S.
Don't let them any closer.
Don't let them any closer. Don't let them hear the truth.
What a clear message.
Yep.
And it comes from an ice cream guy. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice if someone like Hakeem Jeffries could point out such a clear line, but he's bought off, so he can't make that direct comparison.
Exactly. And that's part of why, sometimes I've spoken about the deficit myth, and I really am an admirer of Stephanie Kelton, and her work is factually correct. But from a political as a political matter, I don't necessarily think that we need to emphasize that, because this is just an age-old adage, I guess it's not age-old, but Tupac said it. They've got money for wars, but they can't feed the poor. I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
Guns are butter.
Yeah, and that's Jeet here had a great piece, I think, about that. It must have been a few months ago, employing that, because I do think people don't, you can you can tap into people's experience of where are my tax dollars going towards. And if you make people connected to where their tax dollars are going, then you can have a more engaged citizenry where they're more involved in the idea that, like, wait, hey, why is Trump proposing adding to the military budget with like this historic increase to put us at World War II levels when we're not at that level of warfare? Why are we cutting healthcare for nearly 80 million Americans?
There are choices being made.
Right. Because I think Americans can understand the concept of a budget and how we allocate our resources. And creating that contrast has real political salience. I think it's a huge reason why so many people stayed home in 2024 is because they saw on their phones what their tax dollars were going towards. And it is this starving baby or this teenage boy who lost both of his limbs.
Bombs dropped on tents. It's obscene.
And that is what the tangible results of what government is doing look like to people. But when you can say, why don't we reorient ourselves towards giving people health care with those funds, that's when you begin to speak to people where they are. And this clip by Bernie Sanders is such a contrast here of that vision.
Just one note on this protest here. Jason Rosenberg points out, huge shout out to the veteran AIDS activist that disrupted this hearing as well. RFK Jr. is an AIDS denialist who just last month gutted the CDC's Division of HIV Prevention and eliminated the entire workforce at the Office of Infectious Diseases and HIV AIDS policy. I mean, that's just another just obscenely grotesque element of RFK's just despicable legacy, frankly.
Yeah. And here is Bernie Sanders laying out the different visions of healthcare and what we can use our resources for in comparison to Bobby Kennedy.
68,000 people a year die because they don't get to a doctor when they should. Is healthcare a human right? Will you work with us to guarantee healthcare to every man, woman, and child in America?
Well, I think you're asking two different questions. You're asking a philosophical question about whether it is a human right, like a constitutional right. As an attorney, I would say that it's not a right of a kind that we otherwise enshrine in the Constitution, because healthcare costs your neighbor money.
Can you pause? Healthcare.
Get your hand out of my pocket. The money I've inherited.
Healthcare costs your neighbor money. Now we're back.
Ben Shapiro territory.
Yep, this is libertarianism. But yep, Bernie didn't ask if it was a civil right. Bernie didn't ask if it was a civil right. He asked if it was a human right, which is a very different thing. Go back a little bit. Just want to also point out that sleight of hand.
Let's pretend like everyone wants to get so philosophical. No, this is a policy question. Should healthcare be guaranteed by our government or not? We don't need to like think about what was in Thomas Jefferson's head about this.
Yeah.
Man, woman, and child in America.
Well, I think you're asking two different questions. You're asking a philosophical question about whether it is
very practical.
A human right, like a constitutional right. As an attorney, I would say that it's not a right of a kind that we otherwise enshrine in the Constitution, because healthcare costs your neighbor money. If I smoke cigarettes for 20 years, I make that choice, which is my choice.
I don't mean to, I don't have a lot of time, so I just.
Thank you.
But I am here.
If you ask if you're asking me a philosophical question,
no.
I gotta, give you a thoughtful answer.
Within 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
So, it's not like freedom of speech, which costs, everybody.
But every other country, Mr. Secretary.
I would just Google what RFK's freedom of speech costs, say, people in American Samoa, and how he runs away from that. But I'll just let it play.
It's not like freedom of speech, which costs, everybody.
But every other country, Mr. Secretary, every other country guarantees health care to all people as a right. Should we, as Americans?
The objective is to get Americans the level of health care that they want, the choice which Americans want.
What?
I don't want the choice to be uninsured.
Well, but
They don't want the choice to die because they don't get to a doctor on time.
Americans prefer private insurance to other insurance sources.
Yeah,
We know what this guy is. Come on, folks.
he's lying at the end there. That's actually not true. Medicare and Social Security, well, Medicare is extremely, extremely popular. And if he wants to talk about how there's scarce resources, I don't agree with that. We now have wealth concentration at the very top that could be clawed back to fund healthcare for even
I've seen
people
his houses.
that Bobby Kennedy would deem as takers of everybody else's healthcare, like if you smoke cigarettes your whole life, or like, you know, if you're like Bobby Kennedy and you engage in recreational drug use, like of heroin and things like that. I guess he would think if he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth,
Taking vacations all the time.
right, that would preclude him from getting healthcare in the future because he didn't take care of his body when he was young. How dare he ask for healthcare later on in his life?
People a level of health care that they'd like?
But if we're talking about what is the most efficient way, if you're saying there's a limited number of resources and that human rights, freedom of speech, that doesn't affect your neighbor. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Perhaps later we'll talk about how Joe Rogan thinks that Kanye's extremely anti-Semitic song should be allowed to go everywhere. But Medicare spends up to 7 times less than private insurers on administrative costs. It is a more efficient system by definition. 1, because it's not profit motivated. 2, because there is nobody in between you and Medicare. Private insurers act like middlemen. They act like the mafia, where they take a cut because they are the gatekeepers between you and your healthcare. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And what Bernie Sanders is showing there is the hollowness of the Make America Healthy Again mantra as a political movement, whatever that means, is because Kennedy says it right there. Well, it shouldn't be a human right because if you make the wrong choices, if you had an addiction to cigarettes or you ate the wrong food, according to that freak, hey, you're shit out of luck.
It's a health movement for wealthy people that,
Yeah.
I mean, the way he says it costs your neighbor money is exactly, that's everything. That's all that matters to these people. They don't want everyone to be healthy because they want people to live fulfilled lives. They want people to be healthy because they think it'll lower their taxes. And it's really gross.
And to see him say this as a Kennedy too, like, given how LBJ presided over the passage of Medicare, and that was a part of his uncle's legacy too. And given how his father ran his campaign and became more radicalized and was more closely associated with labor unions later in his life, I mean, I don't know. It's such a bastardization of that memory, but that's for him to live with, I guess. And his siblings have said similar things to me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.